Welcome back to IBTV's Takedown MMA. I'm Evan Herzog of TheFightMagazine.com, and this is Albert Rosales, our owner and the head coach up at Grinders Fitness in Denver, Colorado. This is segment 2 of episode 2, and this 10 minutes is dedicated to Nate Diaz and what his future holds. He's been all over the news this week, jumping on Twitter, his Instagram, saying, having some choice words, in the same old fashion of the Diaz way.
Typical Diaz.
Saying everybody's boring. This fight bleep is boring. So he's waiting for a call out. He says he's ready for May/June. There has been some call outs. People obliged him. You have Kevin Lee and you have Eddie Alvarez, both guys calling him out. Do you think there's any chance that those fights happen? Or we've heard Nate talk about how he's only wanting the big money fights. He's trying to get $10 million for his fights as well. Do those fights interest you? Do you think they interest Nate? Or do you think this is all kind of a ploy to get that third Conor McGregor fight, especially with Khabib and Ferguson being booked to fight for that interim title?
Personally, I think this is Nate trying to make some money. And who can blame a man for wanting to make some money? We've already seen the McGregor fight twice. Personally, not a fan of it. Okay, I'm past the McGregor fight. Moving down the line is where it gets more interesting. Okay, I think personally, I think Nurmagomedov would beat Nate Diaz pretty handily. I feel like an Eddie Alvarez fight would be an excellent fight. I think that would be a really fun fight. And then even if you go with Tony Ferguson, man, the two styles those two guys have, there is no way that's not going to be a fun fight. I don't ever see Nate being the champion, honestly. He's kind of always just one of those guys who's hanging around the top tier, But to me, maybe if he'd be more consistent and fight more regularly, then maybe he's going to be a little bit better, in terms of where he's ranked at. But, man, you can't take 2 years off of fighting and expect to come back and fight at the highest level. You need to stay consistent, And, hey, we know he always puts on an exciting fight. He always puts on a good show. You can never doubt him for that or his heart. But to me, give me Nate Diaz and Eddie Alvarez. I think that's a great fight. Ferguson's a great fight.
If they don't do the Eddie Alvarez fight with Nate Diaz, this is where we part a little bit. I have to see the third fight. I have to see McGregor Diaz 3 because I think 10, 15 years from now, it's going to be a big drag on the sport if we don't get an answer to that. If we don't have the trilogy, if we don't have a clear-cut winner. Because, again, you got to remember, the first fight, Nate boxes him up in the second round. Conor turns into a panic wrestler. In his own words, the choke happens, it's over. The second fight, Nate weathers the storm, and it almost is going towards the same type of thing. Remember, Nate finished on top of Conor. Who knows what happens if there's another minute left? But that fight was it was not unanimous. There was a draw in there.
Right.
One judge saw it as a draw. That wasn't a clear-cut win. There's been debate. I do, as much as it may pain me to say, I do think Conor probably did win that second fight, but it wasn't convincingly. And I think you add that on to the fact that Nate Diaz was willing to now say it might, some people say, well, yeah, of course he jumped on the chance for the rematch within 10 days because he knew it was another payday. But I think, he doesn't get enough credit for that. He choked Conor McGregor out and then within 4 or 5 days was getting ready to sign another contract for a second fight, or at least verbally agreeing to it. I think that's probably... Honestly, I think that's the only fight Conor comes back for, too.
Well, here's where I stand on that. It's just, the reason I don't like that fight is because, we'll just call it the Conor McGregor factor. It's something we touched on earlier on the earlier segment, when you have these super fights. That comes down to Conor McGregor. He's the one who, started this whole super fight thing, and everybody wants to get the money fight. And, like I said, I can't hate on somebody for wanting to make money, but it does throw your divisions into a kind of, you're stuck in purgatory. We don't know who the champion is. We don't know who the next contender is. Nate Diaz has done nothing to warrant him getting a title shot. And honestly, Conor McGregor's never defended his title against a number one contender. It's no different than Michael Bisping picking these money fights that he's not going to get beat up in. He ducked Jacare, he ducked Yoel Romero, he ducked, all the top guys.
And we've seen
Robert
what that's
Whitaker
done.
And now look, it just throws your divisions into chaos, And honestly, to me, if Conor wants to be, and he's earned what he's got, don't get me wrong, but if he wants to be considered the real champion, he needs to defend it against one of the top contenders. Nurmagomedov or Tony Ferguson. For you to fight Nate Diaz again coming off such a long layoff, to me it doesn't validate him as the champion. That's my opinion, but that's just where I stand on it.
Let me ask you, would your thoughts on the fight change if and when they do strip Conor and it's just the trilogy fight, no title on the line?
I'm okay with that.
I think a lot of people are on the same page, and I might be too. I don't think the belt really means anything to Nate Diaz because of his time off. He's not 21, 22 years old anymore. He's not going to put 5-6 fights in 2 years anymore. He's been pretty much honest about that since he was about 28 years old.
Right.
That he's not willing to put in the work to get to the title shot. He just wants the big fights. And I think a lot of people could get on board if and when the UFC strips Conor McGregor. Now, will we see that? We don't know because they're continuing to play this game.
Right, and it all boils back to Conor McGregor. And I know he's made the UFC millions and millions of dollars, and he's done a tremendous amount of things for MMA in terms of getting them more out into the general public and even breaking into the boxing world. No matter what you think about the Mayweather-McGregor fight, like, he did something that no other MMA fighter was capable of doing. Correct.
Yep.
So like I'm not necessarily hating on Conor McGregor. I just don't like what he's done to the divisions because it just doesn't allow your division to grow. You just put your whole division into a stalemate. And now you've got unhappy fighters from number 1 down to number 10 because you're not able to move up to that next step because Conor McGregor's kind of picking and choosing his fights. And, at that point, if that's all you want is super fights, let the title go, and then you go out and make your money. And then I don't have a problem, Conor McGregor fighting, man, if you wanted to move up to light heavyweight and fight Daniel Cormier, hey, you know what, whatever, do what you got to do. But to me, you can't put your division on hold. It just doesn't make sense to me.
All right, so let's take Conor out of the picture because I think it's hard to do because I honestly think that is the fight Nate is continuously aiming for. Let's take him out of the picture. You mentioned Ferguson. Well, Ferguson and Diaz, and that is a fun matchup. But if Ferguson beats Nurmagomedov and Conor continues to sit on the sidelines, Nate Diaz keeps popping back up, and every time it pops back up, it's usually has a belt connected to it. And we've kind of just talked about how he's not really deserving of a title shot, but almost all of these scenarios, other than Eddie Alvarez or, even Tyron Woodley is continuously calling out Nate Diaz.
Yeah.
Continuously. And Nate has had 4 fights at welterweight, and 2 of them were against Conor.
You know what that is, honestly? It's a business decision at that point. Nate Diaz has a very strong following. As long as, even Nick hasn't fought in how long, and he's still got people
three years now,
for him, okay?
Yeah.
So those guys have a following, so you're going to make money on any show that you put those guys on, okay? They make money. They know how to promote fights. Whether they want to show up to the actual media stuff is a different story, but they know how to get interest in a fight. They will hype up a fight, okay? So really that's what it is to me, like when you see somebody like Tyron Woodley or some of these guys come out, in terms of looking at the entire division, you're like, okay, well, Nate Diaz brings a huge following. We're going to get paid, especially if you get pay-per-view shares, in your contract. Mm-hmm. We're going to get paid. And honestly, it's not as dangerous a fight as fighting Tony Ferguson and Nurmagomedov or Conor McGregor, one of those guys. So somebody like Tyron Woodley calling him out, honestly, he's looking for a payday and he's looking for a fight where he's not going to get hurt really bad. So I don't know, it's a money thing. It's a money thing.
I agree, and it'll be interesting going forward to see what happens with that entire lightweight division. The division's on fire, even though they haven't had a defending champion since November of 2016.
Drives me crazy.
I think it drives a lot of people crazy, but boy, does it make for drama and some interesting stuff for us to talk about.
Absolutely.
So we'll see what is in store for Nate Diaz. We'll see what's in store for Conor McGregor, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and Tony Ferguson, along with Denver's Justin Gaethje has a fight with Dustin Poirier coming up. I mean, the division's on fire, and we'll be talking a lot about that lightweight division.
Man,
I'm sure of it through the spring. So that'll do it for the second segment. Thanks for joining us here at IGTV. Takedown.